Good morning. In this talk, we'll tell you about our feasibility study on novel digital twins for monitoring compliance debts as part of the stream on data-driven manufacturing, regulation, standard, and guidance. I'm Rami Bahsoon, principal investigator on the project, and I'm joined by Fanmi Ladi, a postdoc on the project. Fanmi and I have interest in software architecture for emerging paradigms such as cloud, IoT, cyber physical system, and digital twins. We have interest in technical debt management and compliance. Other team members include Professor Dukvan, expert in autonomous manufacturing, Professor Georgios Sideropoulos, expert in distributed simulation, and Dr. Leandro Minko, expert in machine learning. Industrial collaborator is Uptime Institute, London. The project takes a broader view to compliance, where we view compliance as a responsibility to operate in agreement with established laws, regulations, standards, and specification and service level agreements. However, ensuring full compliance in digital manufacturing can be challenging and difficult to achieve. If you would take Industry 4 as an example, and if you would focus on production, you may need to ensure compliance across various layers, including cyber physical infrastructure for resilience, compliance in data layer for security, protection, and integrity, compliance for safety in process and control. Compliance once you engineer intelligence in the infrastructure following the principle of responsibility, transparency in design. Given that smart manufacturing is essentially a cyber physical system and operates under numerous operational technical uncertainties, this means that it can be difficult to fully comply in the presence of uncertainties encountered in the operational environment. This can enter the system into what we refer to as a debt. As the spectrum of compliance can be huge and can cross-cut process, product, people, infrastructure, it's expected that smart manufacturing compliance engineer would take or enter into debt somewhere when managing compliance. The debt can be either accidental or intentional for time and cost savings. Generally speaking, if you lag behind the optimality either in production, process, or in the choice of supporting infrastructure, you can enter into debt. We view compliance debt as a form of technical debt. Like financial debt, you may have to pay interest on that debt, and the debt will accumulate over time if it's not managed, paid back, or structured. Technically speaking, the debt can be because of suboptimal or quick and dirty compliance decisions to meet urgent demands like deadlines and budget. Compliance debt can be also accidental due to changes in operating environment, which can invalidate compliance. Changes, as an example, in a cloud platform can lock your manufacturing data. Compliance debt can also be because of changes in policies, regulation, which can also invalidate compliance. You may have seen a few months ago, the European Court of Justice has invalidated the Privacy Shield framework for data sharing between US and EU countries, creating new challenges for future data transfers. EU has to sift now through US laws to ensure lawful data transfer. Smart manufacturing often involves data transfer across sites and continents, and until the issues are fixed, the debt and the interest on that debt is sticking. The project is the first to seek an understanding of the concept of compliance and compliance debt in smart manufacturing, with cases from remanufacturing domain where product is taken apart, cleaned, repaired, and then reassembled to be used again, considering compliance debt that relates to production, process, and infrastructure and people, as human and machine work hand in hand in production. And Fanmi will update you soon on some of the systematic approach that the project has been taken to build an understanding of compliance and its debt through use cases. Another objective of the project is to provide reference architecture model for digital twins for compliance management in smart manufacturing. The ultimate objective is to provide smart manufacturing industry, quality assurance analysts, compliance engineers, and managers with tools that can assist in what-if analysis for compliance and likely debt, and to make compliance debts visible and transparent, and to rethink way to pay the debt, if any, through either design refinements, integration, policy enforcement, or phasing out. The ambition is to promote interactive, predictive, or proactive intervention to reduce and mitigate the risk of compliance violation. We've got some early results on the fundamentals of building cognitive digital twin, leveraging the principles of self-awareness, and we are now exploring its instantiation in cases that relates to smart manufacturing. Funmi will now provide you with some cases and will report on the ongoing investigation related to our project.
Smart manufacturing has been one of the domains where robots have actually been deployed to help in the manufacturing process. Robots are very good at automating repeatable tasks where precision and speed is required beyond those available in humans. Robots in their operation will need to interact with their operating environment. As illustrated on the slide, we see a robot that could be operating in a vessel at sea. They could also interact with other robots in an ensemble of robots to collaboratively solve a problem, and indeed would interact with humans who would operate those robots, or even be co-workers with the robots in the so-called Corobotics collaboration of robot and human. We take interest in this Corobotic domain because it's one of the case studies we've investigated to look at what compliance depth could mean in such an environment. I'll now illustrate this with the help of a video to show you a Corobotic and human and robots working collaboratively together. In this video, we see a robot that is trying to hold the shaft while the operator extracts the impeller in a task to deassemble a water pump in a remanufacturing process. The human uses the press to extract the rotor subassembly from the pump casing, and we see the robot waiting for the subassembly rotor to touch its gripper. The robot then holds the rotor subassembly while the human presses it out of the pump casing. This is a good example of human and robot working together in the assembly process, which could have been complicated for either human or robot to achieve alone. Now, looking at the compliance landscape for such a use case of co-robotics, what are the industry standards at play here? We see that there is an evolution of industry standard from the literature. There has been the ISO 10218, which first looked at robots and robotic devices safety in general, and an evolution of it to version 2 that looks at integration of robots in particular. And more recently, there is ISO TS 15066 that looks at robots in collaboration with humans, more specifically to explore some of the safety implications. One of the issues that has arisen is, does the compliance with a standard such as ISO TS 15066 imply that the robot-to-human collaboration is safe? We answer that question by looking at an experiment where a robot and a human were collaboratively involved in an experimentation. In this experiment, we see a robot trying to achieve a pick and place task, picking an object from one point and dropping it at another. Whilst the robot is dropping and picking this object, the human could intervene to try to pick the object. The goal is for the human not to be hurt by the robot in the process of trying to pick the object. This setup is such that the robot and its operating environment were assessed against ISO TS 15066 and found to be compliant by the assessors. Unfortunately, the result of this experiment was that indeed there are some scenarios where the robot could hold the hand of a human and harm that person or injure them as part of trying to pick the object. Thankfully, in this experiment, a pork belly was used in the simulation so that the actual impact is not that of a real human. But the message is clear. Compliance with a standard does not imply safety altogether. So what are the sources of this compliance debt? They could be design time or runtime, as we have found in our investigation. Design time concepts are often related to human assessors not doing a proper risk assessment, or missing scenarios based on simplified assumptions of the operating environment, or intentionally taking shortcuts to save cost, which could then lead to unintended consequence further down the line. In a dynamic world, we know that the operating environment changes as well as the robot state and that of the human as well, perhaps due to fatigue and tiredness whilst operating in this environment. So what we've been looking at is how we could use technology of digital twin to help reduce such a compliance debt or violation. Digital twins are real replicas of an exemplar system that is working, and they have the ability to ingest data about the real state of that system and be able to forecast what might happen in a real operating environment. We are using the digital twin analogy because it is a living replica. In this illustration, we see that a digital twin is monitoring a Corobot that has its fundamental human, robot, and environmental factors. And using this information, it is able to learn about changes in that environment. And using risk policy rules in the digital twin, we are able to forecast the likelihood of an hazardous incident happening. Also, this digital twin can learn from other Corobots deployed in other sites to learn about incidents that have happened there or likelihood of incidents that could occur that have been prevented, and use that intelligence in its actively monitored environment. Our message is that regulatory standards in the digital manufacturing landscape is large, and unpredictable compliance violations do exist even when complying with some of these standards. We have seen digital twin as a promising approach to act as a look-ahead compliance evaluator to manage compliance debt. We'll now stop and take some questions in the Q&A.